Welcome to another video. Today's video is about afterlife. Before we start, make sure you hit the like button because that shows your good upbringing and manners. The question of afterlife, whether there is life after death or not, has been the most famous question throughout history. It has stirred humanity and some people have dedicated their whole lives to searching for this answer. Yet no one seems to get close enough to any answers. We have vague assumptions and theories of what happens after death, but we don't know the real answer. And this video is not about finding answers for the afterlife. This is about prying deeper into the question. And I think if you pry deeper, you can find wisdom in the question itself, as I'll show in the end of the video. First, let's talk about why the thought of afterlife or the idea exists in the first place. So when we are born, we do certain things. We sleep because our body needs sleep. We eat because, well, we need to sustain ourselves. We make friends and relationships so we could be happier and sort of collaborate in life because it makes life easier. We do a lot of things, and behind those things we have reasons. We ask why do we do that, and we have answers. But this series of events, when you're born, you grew up, you go to school, you go to college, you get a job, and then you marry, and then your children and grandchildren continue your line, your blood. They carry your blood. And after that, when you're old, you reach the end of your life and you ask, oh, what else? What happens now if I die? Because from the moment you're born, this series of events, being born and making friends and learning things, all of these things follow each other like a chain. And then when you reach the end, there's no answer. It's just a black void. You don't know what's on the other side. So that's why people in the past and even now believe that this chain of events are not useless. It continues like it's a preliminary steps towards something greater, something after death. We don't have the answers, but something is out there. That's why we have religions and a lot of theories about what happens after death. It's not a gimmick. In the past, somebody didn't come up with the idea and duped a lot of people that, hey, you should come join this religion, we'll promise you heaven. That wouldn't have happened if people didn't have a notion of heaven in the first place. Even the pagans, even people who didn't believe in Jesus or other religious figures, they believed in afterlife. They had their gods. So the moment men began to use reason, they thought of the afterlife. Because it's logical. It makes sense that you should think of something after death, because it doesn't make sense that we should go through all these drudgeries of life to, at the end, turn into dust and be food for worms. If you take it from a scientific perspective, we do die. We are completely obliterated, if you like, when we are dead. But from a philosophical point of view, we can ask the question of why. Why do we have to die? Why are we born in the first place? So the two perspectives sort of complement each other. We use science to understand life, but we can't understand what's beyond life. Because of that, we have to use philosophy. The scientific perspective tells us that the moment our heartbeat stops and our brain stops to function, we die. Then that's it, asleep. You're just sleeping for eternity. But philosophical perspective tends to veer towards meaning, towards finding reasons behind everything, even death. And that we don't know what happens after that, but we do know what happens in life. So from that we draw conclusions and theories and something else. Even scientific and philosophical perspectives, even if they try their best, cannot find a solid answer. So we are all drawing conjectures from these theories. But here's something else. Scientific perspectives and what most of the atheists believe is just saying that our life, this consciousness that is so complex, is just because of brain, a piece of meat. So everything we see before us is the work of a piece of meat. All the arts, all the technology, culture are just the product of a piece of meat that's in our mind right here in this dome. And these people are so smart, they have answers for everything. Because when it comes to the afterlife, they are so adamant, they are so persistent that there is no such thing as afterlife. It cannot be because we don't know what's out there. Nobody has come back from the land of dead and said, this is what happens when you die. So you could say they are less imaginative. But there's also a loophole in their reasoning because they tend to be so scientific that they try to ignore the philosophical implications of life and what happens after life. When it comes to the question of existence, scientists and atheists answer, if you ask when the world came about, they say it came about billions of years ago. And if you ask how did it come about, they say, well, it came through the Big Bang. But they're forgetting something. There's a loophole. They don't answer why the world came about. They're ready to answer you the how and the when of the world, but they are lost when you ask question is why the world came about. And this is what I would call the great why. And a lot of people might say that the why question is irrelevant. How is it irrelevant? The how and when of the world is relevant, but the why is not. Think about every single petty or small action that you took. I assure you that behind every petty or small action of yours, there's a why. You have a reason for doing that. Think about an action that you did 5 hours ago or yesterday, and think about the reason behind that. We take walks for reasons. Maybe we are bored. We eat for a reason. We are on the internet for a reason. We play games for a reason. Nothing is without reason. But when it comes to the question of existence, the grand question, we tend to say that it's irrelevant. Even though we use the how and when, we are so ready to answer that the world came about billions of years ago. How it came about, through Big Bang. But we readily ignore the question of why. I'm not a genius and I know nothing. Nor you or any other scientist, even if he's the best scientist in the world, or even the best philosophers, they wouldn't know what happens after that. We can, as I said, only draw conjectures. But I think you can draw as much wisdom from the question as you can from analysis and coming up with theories. Even if I argue with the dumbest atheist or scientist on the question of afterlife or whether it exists, I might lose, but I can say this. You see, children are so persistent in their questioning. They're like, if they ask you something, where does bread come from, and you answer them, then they will ask again, where does that come from? And even if you ask them that, they will continue asking questions of why. Why does that happen? Why is this like this? Why does that happen? So they keep asking questions of whys. And this is what you should do when it comes to the question of existence. Because I've been a child, as I said, and asked the question, series of why does that happen? Because I've questioned a lot of whys, I've come to this conclusion. Our yearning for an afterlife shows that we are afraid of death, that we are not ready to accept that we could end one day forever. And some might say that we come up with the ideas of heaven and afterlife because of a coping mechanism. We are not able to digest that idea that we could somehow die, and because of that we come up with the idea of heaven. But my perspective is that we come up with the ideas of heaven and afterlife because our minds are unable to fathom the illogical implications that all these things in front of us, these beauties and art and cultures, are nothing, that they would perish one day and they have no meaning behind them, that this is just, our existence is just useless. And because we cannot fathom and cannot digest that idea, we have assured ourselves that this life is not going to end one day, that there is a continuance after this. And even if you are persistent with your coping mechanism argument that I'm afraid of death, that's why I'm coming up with ideas of heaven, I'll say this: I'm afraid of death because I love life. I don't know why I shouldn't love life. And this is the irony. People say that you tend to think of heaven when this life is hard for you, when you can't do things in this life. You try to compensate for that by thinking about another world where you could do those things. But I'll say this, that if this life is so hard, why do I love it still? Why do I love it so much that I think of a continuance after this, a sequel to this life? If it's that hard, why shouldn't all people become atheists? Why shouldn't all people believe that this world is for nothing and it would end one day? That should give relief to people who are living life in hardcore mode. Who would want to live in a life that's really hard? I hope I made sense. What I mean to say is that if life is so hard, we shouldn't hope for an afterlife. We should just hope that this life should end when the time for our death comes. But no, some of us are not ready to sleep in oblivion for the rest of eternity. We are hoping for something after this life, and that shows you that we still love life, and that life is maybe not that hard. We get used to that drudgery and hardship. And for the people who might say that I have not faced much difficulty, I'll say this: I've seen people who have lost all of their family members. I've seen children getting orphaned. I've seen people whose lives were tragic, more tragic than you can find in any fiction. But still they haven't stopped hoping for something after this life. They haven't stopped laughing. They haven't stopped hoping for better.